His name was Gary Kildall. You probably don't know it. That is exactly the point. In 1974, a full year before Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard, Kildall wrote the world's first personal computer operating system. He invented the BIOS. He pioneered the CD-ROM. He built the software foundation that the entire early PC industry ran on. And then one afternoon in 1980, IBM came to his door. What happened next cost him everything. Gary Arlen Kildall was born on May 19, 1942, in Seattle, Washington, the same city that would produce Bill Gates 13 years later. His father ran a seamanship school. The sea was in his blood. He studied mathematics and computer science at the University of Washington, earning his bachelor's in 1967, his master's in 1968, and his PhD in 1972. His doctoral thesis founded data flow analysis, a mathematical technique that every modern compiler uses to optimize code. He was, by any measure, a genuine scholar of exceptional ability. In 1972, Kildall joined the faculty of the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, as an associate professor of computer science. Intel lent him their brand new 8008 and 8080 microprocessor chips to work with. Most people at Intel saw those chips as components for industrial control systems. Kildall saw something entirely different. He saw a computer. In 1973, he wrote PL/M, the first high-level programming language for microprocessors. Before this, programming a microprocessor meant writing machine code by hand, tedious, error-prone, and accessible only to specialists. PL/M changed that. But the deeper problem was storage. Connecting the 8080 to a floppy disk drive required completely custom software for every machine. There was no standard, no common language between the processor and the disk. Kildall decided to write one. Working in his home in Pacific Grove, California, Kildall created CP/M, Control Program for Microcomputers, in 1973 and 1974. It was the world's first operating system for personal microcomputers. With CP/M, you could type commands on a keyboard, store and retrieve files on a floppy disk, and run programs, the basic operations of personal computing that we take completely for granted today. Before CP/M, none of this existed at the microcomputer scale. Intel saw a demonstration and showed little interest. Kildall commercialized it himself. But CP/M had a problem. It only worked on one specific hardware configuration. Every time a new computer came out, CP/M had to be completely rewritten. Kildall solved this in 1975 by inventing the BIOS, Basic Input-Output System. The BIOS was a thin layer of firmware that sat between the operating system and the hardware. The OS communicated with the BIOS. The BIOS handled the machine. One version of CP/M could now run on any computer with a compatible BIOS. The hardware designer could write the BIOS in a few hours. Kildall's OS worked immediately. This is, in evolved form, how every personal computer works today. When you turn on a computer, the first code it runs is Kildall's idea. In 1976, Kildall and his wife Dorothy founded Digital Research Inc. in Pacific Grove. They placed a small ad in Dr. Dobbs' journal selling CP/M for $70. By 1981, CP/M ran on 3,000 different computer models. Digital Research had $5.4 million in annual revenue. Gary Kildall had built the operating system of the personal computer era. In the summer of 1980, IBM sent a team to Pacific Grove. They needed an operating system for the personal computer they were secretly developing. Bill Gates, who had no operating system, had referred them to Kildall. The IBM representatives arrived. Kildall was not there. He had flown out that morning in his private plane, delivering software to a client. His wife Dorothy handled the initial meeting. IBM presented a non-disclosure agreement. IBM could use all information freely. Digital Research had to keep the entire meeting secret. Dorothy refused to sign without Gary's approval. Gary returned for the afternoon. Negotiations continued, but IBM wanted to pay a flat fee and rename CP/M. Kildall's existing contracts with other customers required royalty arrangements. Accepting IBM's terms would have destroyed his other business relationships. No deal was reached. IBM went back to Gates. Gates said yes, despite having no operating system. He bought QDOS, the quick and dirty operating system, from Seattle Computer Products for $50,000. He renamed it MS-DOS. He licensed it to IBM on a non-exclusive basis, meaning he could sell it to every other PC manufacturer on Earth. The IBM PC launched in August 1981 with MS-DOS at $40. CP/M86 was offered as an alternative on the same machine at $240. The outcome was determined before any customer walked into a store. The "went flying" story spread quickly. Gates told reporters that Kildall had gone flying instead of attending the IBM meeting, implying that his carelessness cost him the deal. This version of events followed Kildall for the rest of his life, reducing a brilliant inventor to a cautionary tale about missing his moment. The actual breakdown, the NDA dispute, the royalty requirement, IBM's pricing strategy, was more complicated. But complicated stories don't stick. Simple stories do. And Gates' version was simple. Kildall kept building. In 1985, through his company ActiVenture, he released the first commercially available CD-ROM product, the Grolier Electronic Encyclopedia. He launched the entire CD-ROM industry. He developed GIM, a graphical desktop for PCs that Apple sued into irrelevance. His DRDOS was technically superior to MS-DOS. The Department of Justice later found evidence that Microsoft had deliberately engineered Windows to produce false error messages when running on DR-DOS. In 1991, Kildall sold Digital Research to Novell for approximately $80 million. He was wealthy. He was also largely erased from the history of the industry he had founded. In 1993, he finished a rough draft of a memoir. He called MS-DOS plain and simple theft. He described IBM's pricing strategy as deliberate sabotage. He wrote that the entire IBM-Microsoft outcome had been engineered against him. He distributed bound copies to friends and family with a note that it would go to print early the following year. It never did. On July 8, 1994, Kildall sustained a serious head injury at a bar in Monterey, California. He died 3 days later, on July 11, 1994. He was 52 years old. The computer industry barely noticed. Harold Evans wrote about Gary Kildall in They Made America and reached a conclusion that IBM and Microsoft disputed, but that the historical record supports. Kildall built the foundation. Gates built the empire on it. The QDOS that Microsoft bought was modeled directly on CP/M's system calls. Every PC running MS-DOS was running Kildall's architectural ideas under a different name. Gates acknowledged this after Kildall's death, calling him one of the original pioneers of the PC revolution and a very creative computer scientist. In life, he had spent years spreading a story about a man who went flying. What did Gary Kildall actually build? 4 things that will outlast the argument about what he lost. First, he built the personal computer operating system, proving in 1974 that a microcomputer could have a standard, portable OS. Every OS since is a descendant. Second, he invented the BIOS architecture, the firmware layer that enables one OS to run on many hardware configurations. Still in every computer built since 1975. Third, he launched the CD-ROM industry with the first commercial optical disc product in 1985. Fourth, he embodied a different vision of computing. Open platforms, separated OS and applications, no monopolistic bundling. The debate between open and closed computing that defines the tech industry today began with these 2 men and this one meeting. 3 lessons from Gary Kildall's story. First, Being first is not enough. Being better is not enough. Being right is not enough. Protecting an invention requires business execution, legal strategy, and the willingness to fight for position with the same intensity you brought to building it. Second, the NDA is worth reading. The IBM negotiation may have broken down over a single contract clause. One document, never signed, altered the course of computing history. Contracts are not paperwork. They are the architecture of a deal. Third, history belongs to those who tell it. Gates spread the story that Kildall went flying. Kildall spent years correcting it and died before anyone fully listened. Controlling the narrative matters as much as controlling the product. He built the foundation. Someone else built the empire. That is the most honest summary of the personal computer revolution anyone has ever written. Thank you for joining us for episode 21. We have completed the digital age section of They Made America. Our next episodes return to the empire builders of the industrial age. Until then, stay curious.